All right, friends, welcome to Mind the Machine. And this is a show about optimism and hope, but through a lens of reality for AI, because the AI journey, it seems like it's rocky, but it's not, friends. There's a lot of good things to accelerate your business and your personal life. And I'm here to be your guide on the journey of AI. So with that, let's jump into Mind the Machine. Andy Ballester, who not only founded GoFundMe, but is killing it with iPop.ai. Lots of great stuff to talk about. So, Andy, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us and say hello to the Mind the Machine people.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes. People and bots. We're a hybrid group.
Love it.
Yes. So, Mind the Machine is really about the conversations about, obviously, in a very AI-forward world. I try and bring hope to folks by talking to entrepreneurs like yourself who really have figured out not only the pattern of good startup, but good startups with AI and solving real problems. So I think this is a wonderful conversation for folks who want to get a little bit of your playbook. I'd love to hear just the story of GoFundMe. I think it's such an impactful organization, and let's just start there.
Sure. So the precursor concept for GoFundMe, it started in 2008. I was working at a startup here in San Diego at the time. And so my whole career has been different startups. And one of the great people I worked with at that startup had moved on to some other startups and had contacted me. His startup had blown up. In the bad way, imploded, I guess.
Yeah.
And, the startup I was at, we had a good run, but it was, it was on its way out. And so we were kind of just chatting and talking about like, what's next for both of us. And we didn't really have, jobs lined up yet. And so he had started talking about this concept that he was excited about. And, in 2008, it was a different world in fintech then. And a lot of the processes we take for granted were just not available to do digitally yet. And so he had this concept around helping people save. We saw a lot of our friends who had like high car payments and high credit card bills. And so we were like, could we make it easy and fun to save, gamify it, but also make it like a responsible thing to do. And so we thought through this product that at the time we were super excited about called Coin Piggy. And the concept there was, it was basically your savings account, but it was very directed. It was, I want to save up for a TV or a car or something. And we were going to help you figure that out using just great mechanics and a good workflow and, easy to use transactions and things like that. And so when we built that out on paper, we found that it was pretty much the worst savings account in the world because of interchange fees, and you're losing, a certain percentage on the way in every time. And so we didn't think that was such a viable concept. But one of the things that we loved about our initial design was we had a background from a previous startup building viral products together. And how do you get the word out about an idea? And there was a workflow in there where, let's say I'm saving up for my TV, and for my birthday, my aunt wants to kick in $20. Well, I don't really care about the fees as much in that case. And so how do we take that concept of people putting in money together towards something and not just me putting in my own money into a system? And so what would people use that for, and what would that product look like? And so our first product in the personal fundraising space, because crowdfunding didn't really exist as a term at the time, was called Create a Fund. And that was really the first product we launched together. And so it took us about 6 months to get up and running. There were some fintech complexities we had to figure out, and the product by no means was perfect, but we were up and running. We got the word out, and we started getting a really tiny amount of traffic to that concept. And then over the next 8 years, it turned into GoFundMe at some point. And and then it turned into a product that actually people knew about. And so that was super exciting to see that evolution there.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those companies that I think about like, what a great idea. I remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, why did I think of that? Well, because, I think we do analog crowdfunding every time it's a kid's birthday, right? And it's like, how do you get relational equity to turn into actual cash? And this is what you've done. So where GoFundMe as a business is where today?
GoFundMe as a business is, not just serving personal crowdfunding, but also serving through our merger with Classy, really big nonprofits in fundraising. And so we are, we're all over the world. It is global, truly a global company now. It is serving people every day, and every year to the tunes of billions of dollars of help delivered.
Yeah, absolutely solving a real problem there. Is there any story that you can recall and think and have pride in that you were able to connect and transform? I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds of these stories, but does any one come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories and crises and times we've had to either pivot the company or shift like how we think about a problem because there's some new need in the world that we could be really helpful for. There were big pivots in COVID. We had new types of customers coming to us before PPP or Idle was set up for small businesses. We had small businesses coming to us for the first time in droves saying, like, I don't know how to pay my employees right now because everyone's in lockdown. How do we keep the business alive? How do we bring the community in to help us to keep this business going to make sure that we make payroll? And with a small team that was put together internal to GoFundMe, they took on that challenge to figure that out. And we had hundreds of millions of dollars out the door to small businesses before PPP or Idle. And so this happened all incredibly quickly, but it demanded a lot from the team because there's just different processes you need to observe for business versus personal fundraising. And, they figured it all out. And so extremely proud of the team there. A really recent example is, GoFundMe's there for crises and natural disasters and what happened in LA with fires. Just the support we were able to deliver extremely quickly for people looking for, where do I go to stay tonight? And having their support network being able to help them in that immediate way was incredibly important. And so, again, $250 million went to deliver help to people experiencing the LA fire crisis just recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. It is actually mind blowing. And, I know I didn't really share like this question and in advance, but indulge me a little bit because I wanted just really I'm reflecting on your pattern recognition to ideate for things that are so successful. I mean, and we're going to get to iPop. I mean, but I'm curious, is there a way that you look at the world, a methodology, or if you were to try and tell someone how to come up with a great business idea, like what's your formula? What's your secret?
I guess part of what I talk about with startups, because I do try to give a lot of my time back to the startup community, especially here in San Diego. They don't always work. Certainly my ideas don't always work. But what gets me excited and often what's required of a startup founder is just that longevity. You have to persevere through all kinds of obstacles that you never could have predicted starting out in a direction. And you just have to know that they're coming and you have to get up every day and keep going. And so what gets me excited is accessibility to technology. There's always a new wave of technology that is something that is new on the forefront and that only a small number of people can access. And what makes me excited through my career as both a product manager and a technologist is how do we make it easy for people to access different pieces of technology? And so GoFundMe, came out of the concept that fintech at the time was really hard to access and it was really scary to access. I talk about I know this because it doesn't seem like that long ago to me in some ways, but the world was a different place then. My mom would not have put her credit card online for a product at that time, right? And so that is a very different world than we live in right now, where we have our credit card saved into the browser just so it's easier to give it to more places.
All of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it is kind of radical to think about that, like how you've basically built in trust in what was a trustless system. It's kind of a miracle, and thank God you persevered, right? So it sounds like perseverance is really, does perseverance trump intelligence, or is this a hybrid super skills, a set of super skills?
I think there's like quite a few skills that startup are asked of startup founders, and you don't need all of them, but there's a good set in there that you should probably have to keep going. But perseverance is a big one. There's no founder I haven't talked to that hasn't had just incredibly detrimental setbacks at some point in the startup life cycle that you got to figure out how to just get past, or else the story ends there.
Yeah. No, it's really good. I saw Ryan Cooter from Techstars post something, I think it was last night, asking folks what was their number one thing. And that was the pattern that I saw, is this determination. Timing, of course, is good. I think you had determination, a timing. You were definitely solving for something that didn't exist, but, and to the benefit of a lot of people. So amazing. All right. So let's shift now to the fabulous, wonderful world of AI. And I got to tell you, I love how you said really providing access to technology. This is the whole reason I do the show, Mind the Machine. It's the whole reason I wrote the book on AI, which is, How to Win Friends and Influence Robots, evergreen book, and it's because I do feel like these tools are really democratized, but it's a really noisy world. So how do you get to this stuff? How do we make it easy for people? And so you are a perfect person to talk about someone who's innovating in real time with iPop. So give us the spiel on what iPop is, why we should care, and how you're going to pop our eyes out.
Awesome. Okay. So iPop is a platform that makes it easy for people and businesses of all technical levels to access computer vision. And computer vision is AI looking at images, video, live streams to parse information out of that and structure it in a way that we can use it in other sorts of apps and programs and products.
Mm-hmm. And you have a partnership, I think, now with Qualcomm. You're Qualcomm based, obviously, because this is an edge experience. And maybe talk about that a little bit as well.
We are collaborating with Qualcomm's AI Hub. We had been up until mid last year, we'd been a cloud only product, which cloud is great. It's there is a lot of advantages to being in the cloud, but there's a lot of advantages to being on the edge as well. And so one of the things that we were looking at is, and this is one of the challenges we had to solve, is around self-service training, and how do people train a model themselves without deep machine learning experience. And when we talked to Qualcomm's AI Hub's team, they make it incredibly easy for people with models to put them on Snapdragon devices. And so we saw that and we were like, oh, this is such a great idea. We're already trying to get people to create models on our platform to find custom objects and conditions and people and actions. So how do we leverage that and integrate with the AI Hub to get it directly to a Snapdragon device? And so our first foray into that was building a Windows runtime to actually run on the Windows Snapdragon devices. And we did a collaboration around a set of workshops where we would have developers come in and who did not have experience training AI, and walking them through, hey, give us your pile of images, and we're going to walk through step by step and go from a pile of images and video frames to get to a model that's deployed in the cloud and also on a Snapdragon device. And so that's been extremely exciting. And so that sets us up well to go now to, Snapdragon also exists on mobile. And so get to mobile. And then separately we'll, parallel track the iOS experience there. And so getting, models to the edge is, great for a lot of reasons. It increases the privacy around your data. And so if you don't have to transfer that data, you're always going to be a little bit more secure. And so it opens up use cases that way for startups and people looking to solve problems with vision. It solves latency problems. If you don't have to transfer that data, the response can come back a lot faster. And then more importantly, for a lot of startups, it solves a COGS problem. When you have to run a server in the cloud, there is compute you have to pay for. But we have such fantastic computes on us all the time now, either on our laptop or our phones. And so your customers can help solve some of the compute problems. So the edge is really important to us. And that's a large part of what we're doing this year as part of our roadmap is just more and more surfaces that you can use iPop on.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the COGS one because, I do hear about like the security and privacy and, maintaining your data, but I didn't really think about that, the COGS part. I think that's really important. That's definitely a good little message for me to keep there. I wanted to take a step back and talk about, I would say at this point, iPop is very successful. I've seen you at a couple of hackathons. I've seen your demos. You're really killing it. To get to this point, what have been the challenges for you? Have you kind of worked through this market of AI that is moving so fast and the capabilities are moving so fast? I just think about the last 6 weeks, what's happened in reasoning and compute power from DeepSeek to, now these agentic workflows from Manus. It's hard to keep up. So how do you keep up and staying relevant? I don't think you have any problem with that, by the way. But what's the secret sauce there in terms of, keeping those breakthroughs going and keeping up in this really fast-paced world?
Yeah, it's progressed incredibly quick. We knew this, AI was going to be a fast-moving space when we started in 2023. But I think it's moved much faster than even we could have predicted. And the rate of change and new models that come out and noise that's out there is a lot. And it's a lot for us as a startup to keep up with. It's a lot for our customers to keep up with. And so I think there's a level of, as a company, we have to be really grounded in what technology is out there. And to do that, it requires work and effort to consume and curate and look through and actually try stuff out. And so there's a lot of DNA in our small team. We're 10 people that is curious. And so we're curious about what's new and what's out there, and we try stuff. And so that there's a lot of that. But at the same time, you have to allow yourself and the company to solve the mission that you're trying to solve for your customers. And there's a temptation there to get really distracted. And so that definition of what is a distraction taking us away from the mission and what is a pivot that is actually important for us to embrace and change about the mission, there's a fine line that distinguishes those sometimes. And so having good prioritization and discussions internally all the time about, hey, we just saw this new thing come out. Do we need to jump on this, or is this something that we need to wait on or evaluate in a couple of months? That's something that does consume a lot of our time, and I think is important to that discernment AI companies right now. Yeah,
is so important. And I think about, your customers, your customers probably require a better cloud experience, or, being on the AI hub is something that's very tangibly important for them to have a better customer experience. But it is interesting is how do you make those decisions? And I think, what I hear is you're vigilant. You got a team that really loves what they're doing. So I'll kind of approximate another skill set is as much as passion takes a hit for, startup traits, it's not about passion. I think you got to be passionate about AI. You got to love to learn and dig into all this stuff that's dropping. And it sounds like you get a pretty passionate team.
Yeah, I think, you can call it passion, you can call it curiosity, but the willingness and the mission to solve this problem and to be open to other ideas coming in from the outside. I think all of those are important for that discernment thing you're talking about.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So next question. We know that you're transforming businesses through your AI powered vision model. What was that aha moment? Not to sound like Oprah or anything, but what was that aha moment that convinced you that this indeed was the next frontier worth tackling? And was there some spark? Was there some milestone where you go, dude, we're in. We gotta move. We gotta do this. What was that point?
Yeah, so for iPop, that milestone was I like to spend a lot of my time, especially when I'm in between startups, mentoring in San Diego. I was mentoring out of a venture studio here in San Diego called Launch Factory, and during the course of that mentorship, I got involved with a cohort of companies, 4 companies trying to solve problems in the computer vision space, and so each of them had a very different business model, but at its heart, they were trying to look for objects, conditions, actions, or people in a scene in either video or images. And so, from a technology standpoint, they should have looked very similar as companies. And of course, from a marketing standpoint, they're solving different business use cases and all that would be very different. But as an engineer, you would expect to see them look very similar under the hood. And getting into it, I saw 4 different companies that started 4 different ways. And that as an engineer just kind of piqued my curiosity. Why is it so different? It's like and the amount of time they were spending on foundational technologies just seemed insane to me at the time. And this was back in in the 2020 to 2022 range. And so it was incredible to see. I had done a little bit of machine learning, a little bit of AI before that, but to see the depth they had to go through and just where they were starting from. To me, it was like if a web startup said, hey, we're going to take the first 6 months of our existence and we're going to go build a database, not build on top of the database, but actually build the database itself. Yeah. You'd be like, what are you doing, dude? Just go into AWS and grab a MySQL database and let's get going, or grab Firebase and let's go. Yeah. And so, but diving in there, that was the option at the time. It was, you have to build these things from scratch. And there were great technologies that were on the foundational side of how do you make that process a little bit more efficient, a little bit easier, a little bit more understandable or predictable. But there was no end-to-end solution that allowed you to just work through a very structured workflow and get to an output that was going to be ready for production. And I researched and I helped them research because I was like, this has to exist. There has to be something here. And it just didn't. And we saw a lot of things geared more for the experts, for teams that had a deep understanding of machine learning, about how to build models. We're talking about PhD level folks. The group of founders, for the most part, that I was working with at the time, they didn't have that level. They were all fantastic technologists, but they just didn't have that level of understanding. And so these tools just weren't for them, or if they were, they weren't accessible enough in a way that it just was obvious how you worked through this problem. And so that was the moment, talking to my current co-founders, Torsten and Brad, where we said, this should exist. There should be a platform here where any old engineer like myself, a web engineer, product engineer, could come in and just work through a series of things and get to an output that we're happy with, that I can use just like I would use any other API.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. And I love the fact that it's because you're in it, and my theory is because you're giving your time back, you're trying to help others, you're coming across these problems in an authentic utility type way. You're not just sitting around trying to, I don't know, I guess I think about, mercenaries versus missionaries in the entrepreneur world. You're on a mission to help solve. And is that a fair assessment of your mindset when you're in there with the startups mentoring, is just this mission focused way about it?
Yeah. That sounded like a problem. The more I thought about it, I was like, why doesn't this exist? And if it did exist, what would people do with it? And that's the part that like just piques my curiosity and gets me excited. And then I thought about like all the times I've consumed images as a product manager, right? Like I've built many products that have brought in millions of images into a platform. And you know what we did is you take them and you have some review process to make sure they're safe for work. And like it involves humans like most of the time, especially for small startups, like, you know, previous to this AI revolution. But we kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best and throw them in a bucket somewhere. It could be, you know, Google Drive, an S3 bucket, whatever. But it exists there in a black box, and we don't use it as a source of data. We don't make product experiences around what are in our users' images and videos, and we don't learn about our customers from what they give us visually. And so that kind of struck me as like, man, I've had like these horse blinders on this entire time to like what are in these images. And I've had questions like, you know, every startup I've been to, you have some level of images or video. And I've had tons of questions about that you try to answer by just sitting down and looking through like 100 or 1,000 images and trying to form some conclusions, but never had a systematic way where I, as a web and app developer, can just like write a script and rip through millions of images and like come up with good raw data that I can start to roll up into conclusions.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely very insightful. And there's a core part of our demographic that are emerging graduates, students, a lot of the universities around town. If you had to explain a use case in its most simple form of what iPop does, paint us a picture, so to speak, of the exact problem you're solving and how you're using these image databases.
Yeah, I may have to give a few because we're pretty like this technology is very horizontal, which is what is exciting about it. But I think, you know, to paint the picture, you kind of have to talk about a couple of different capabilities. And so I know, you know, viewers of this podcast are super interested in like how do machines start to converge with humans, and vision is incredibly important. We have such a sophisticated visual system available to us as humans, and I think we take that for granted quite often, especially when we start to look at like how AIs visualize something and how do like machines start to learn from visual information. But so the use cases that we take a look at have several categories. One is finding the existence of an object or a person or condition in a scene. So does something exist? That's one of the questions we ask. And so one of the companies we talk to has underwater robots, and they want to know if there are cracks in the drinking water, municipal infrastructure. They send in a robot and it's swimming around in there. It's taking pictures every meter or so, and they come out with essentially like 8 hours of video of like what it's taken a picture of, right? And somebody has to go and hand review those things for situations like cracks and spalls and concrete defects. And so, where there is a lot of visual information, there's just not enough human attention time on the planet. There are things like there's a stat we ran across in the security space. There's trillions of hours of security footage taken every year. And like, there's no way humans are looking at any of that, right? Like even a percentage of that. And so, but there's so much data in there, and and so how do we start to understand the data we already have? Because there's so much of it. Let's look at it. Let's use it as a source of data. So that's one way that you can use iPop to start to cut down just a plurality of stuff into data.
And that's such a relatable example, because I think, what would be the alternative is to send a human down and look at this water main or whatever. And, it doesn't sound very fun and or safe or efficient. So when I think about displacement of jobs, which is a big focus that we talk about on this podcast, because again, we're really looking at hope. Like, how do we get to a better order of job? This is a great use case to say this is a better order of a job. Like, no one has to swim and look at cracks in the ocean or water mains. So
right, exactly. And so so I love that you like those types of use cases where there's so much data that it's really hard for humans to even look at. there are use cases where we could help QA workflows by using visual information. And so one of our customers, they send medical couriers out, and they look like basically gig workers that are sent out to pick up lab samples from clinics that get centralized into a centralized lab. And so one of the things they wanted to know is, are we picking up the right amount of samples? Like, are they the right samples? And so you could have somebody type all those things in, and like that is what they were kind of doing. But you could also back that up in that data entry with visual information by just taking a picture of the samples that they got and then using that information to ping the database. Hey, there's 3 samples here of these different types and they have this text on them. Are those the right ones? And all that handshaking can happen automatically from just taking a picture. And so things like that, where in the real world, objects are coming through an existing workflow or process, we can use visual information to help QA to make sure everything's happening in that process correctly. We have a customer in the logistics space that has cargo going through warehouses. There's pieces of information they want to know about that cargo. Is it labeled correctly? Is it the right height for the end destination bay that it's going into? These are things that are thought about in the logistics space in our real world problems. And there's a lot of different ways to solve it, but visual is one of them. And it's really easy because everyone's empowered with cameras now in their pockets. And so we have the ability to use visual information to help take some of these measurements or gather data in a way that we didn't before.
Yeah. I do these AI workshops for a range of expertise levels for small companies, large companies, universities, and so forth. And it's always intriguing to me is that a majority of folks do think that ChatGPT is the path. Like when you say, oh, do you use AI? Yeah, I use AI. I got ChatGPT. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so much deeper than that. But it really is that deep correlation of what I think borders on wisdom, and lived experiences, that correlation of things, repeat experiences. And do you think AI is at that point now? Do you think the new reasoning that has been rolled out in the last couple of months is at that high correlation state?
I think it's there enough to where I get tremendous value out of when I sit down and feed it disparate data. I'm going to get something new that I haven't thought of out of it. And so I think it's valuable in that way. I think I think we're still at the stage where all of these tools, they're going to produce, they produce things for really easily, which is awesome. But there's a high curation that I, as a user, need to take on that step. I'm not just going to take what it says and dump it right to a web page for marketing, or dump it right into my code editor and roll it out to production. But it gives me that the confidence that like it's a different way of thinking, and it's helped me think through in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily thought through. And so the sounding board capability of AI is incredibly there. And I use it as a soundboard all the time. And if you feed it the right data, it's making connections that you probably wouldn't have made or wouldn't have made as quickly. And so I think from some perspectives, we're at a really interesting cusp.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that if for some reason we were not allowed to use it, I would just be completely stunted now, because I've adapted what I feel is like a capability of AI. It feels more like riding a bike as opposed to memorizing tools or settings or features or whatever, but really this AI capability. And I think that's where the workforce has got to transition to, is to think through all things with an AI lens, in some way. Like, why work so hard, right? I was thinking about the GoFundMe as like, you've changed so many lives through this tool, this platform. Will there be a merging of your history there and that success? And is that your wild thing that keeps you going?
That team, they're thinking about how does AI play a role in what they do. And I will say one of the hardest things on earth to do is to ask for help. And storytelling is incredibly difficult for many of us. And so the coupling of storytelling and asking for help is hard, and you really need a somebody there with you helping you craft that when you're at different points in your life. And so, if I could, I would love to give like a human person that gets to sit down with everybody asking for help on the platform and help them craft their story. But we know that's not a scalable thing. And so there's experiments now of like, can AI be that person? Can AI be that helper to help you ask for help? And even when you're asking for help from other people, there's something that, just as humans in society, it's hard for us to do. And there's the old adage of like, the hardest thing is speak in front of other people. And like people fear that more than death, and the whole, I'd rather be in the box than giving the eulogy at a funeral. I call BS on all of that. I think asking for help is the hardest thing that we have to do as humans. And so, to be helpful there, I think that's a big one.
That's so profound. I would 100% agree with you, because this showing of weakness, it's like, I think our culture, especially in startup, is you have to have such a, thick veneer, thick skin, and you gotta, it's a little bit of, I don't want to say bullshit, but it's a little, like you've got to cast the vision. And so you got to have this bravado about you. And so when you're asking for help, that is the crack in the water main, so to speak, right? That's that part that is so hard. So that's a very, very human observation. And that would be great if we could almost visually see when someone needed our help or had some assistance to be able to articulate that need better.
Right.
Because we all need help. I mean, let's be honest. Right.
Everybody needs help at some point in their life. But it's something that is, it's hard to ask for.
Yeah, it really is. And I'd say from the lens of a startup San Diego, what I love about this community is I do think that we build relationships with people in a place where that they can then trust you and say, gosh, I really am having an misunderstanding about what it pre-money and post-money and, whatever that example is, or admitting that they really don't understand AI or they are really afraid. And I think that is that human part that is so important, which is why it's so great that you're on this show, because you've not only proven that you really can bring value to your customers, but you can do it with the latest and greatest tools, and I think you had said earlier, it's not like you were like some AI guru from the outset. You were someone that had a desire and a need, and you're like, all right, well, I got to dig into this. And you had your own learning curve in this journey, right?
Absolutely. And I think that from a product manager perspective, there's certain healthiness to being on a learning journey as your, startup is on its own learning journey. We, of course, have deep expertise on the team on the machine learning. And so also an incredibly important part of the puzzle, but for myself, I want to make sure that I stay true to our mission of like, where I started out in this journey, could that person access our product and get to something that's productionizable, and easily productionizable?
Yeah. When you think about your kids and how to get them oriented and ready to AI, what's your guiding principle there?
I think it's a tough question because like we don't know where things are going, but we have some track record of seeing kind of the trajectory of this thing, and we know in the future coding is not going to be the same. The ability to create product is going to be in the hands of everybody, but I do think there is something there where if you truly want to create a product and have the right editorial eye for how that product should look and feel, there's a way of thinking about a problem and breaking it down into logical steps and logical flows that will be universal, even in the time where we can ask, hey, just code this whole thing. Because I see it now. I see folks trying to use, the vibe coding and working on Replit, and they'll get to a place where they have something akin to what they had thought of in the first place. But when the rubber meets the road on products is those individual little actions and how users flow through your product. And it's hard to get into that nitty-gritty without a certain level of training about thinking about, here are how products work, and here are how interactions work, and here are how you architect systems so that later when you add something else to it, it is a natural extension of what you've built versus, hey, I built this whole system purpose built for this one tiny problem, and now that I'm tacking on things, I'm getting to a Frankenstein state. And so I think like right now where we are, there's a certain level of complexity that you're just going to run into that is at some point that where the system breaks down if you're trying to code from a truly like no code experience. In 5 years from now, 10 years from now, of course, like the systems will allow for much more complexity. But I do think articulating exactly what the problem you're trying to solve is and the steps by which you want the product to work is an important thought process that I don't think we even truly have a name for it. Like, what do you major in for school for that? I think it's, on some level, it's part UX, it's part software developer, it's part like, I think product managers don't really have a good school genre that they nicely fit into, but it's like learning project managing it. So I think what I would like to do with them is first, instill a sense of curiosity. And hey, if you have a problem, go out and create something to fix that problem and see how hard it is. Because sometimes like you can build little proof of concepts that make sense. But also like learn about the build process, and we're still going to have problems to solve after AI is at human level intelligence. And so how do we articulate those problems well and the solutions that we have in our brains to the AI?
That's pretty profound. I hearing you talk about that, there's like 1,000 things running through my mind, but probably the most predominant thought here is that we ourselves are going to just need to be hybrid and multi-skilled. I think the silo of product manager, product marketing, I think these disciplines are going to all come together. And I think this probably vibes very well with the trend of the rise of the solopreneur. Is like, you really are all of those skill sets. You really are marketing. You can be marketing. You can be like, maybe you're not the best at all of these things, but if you have a hybrid macro understanding of almost every part of the business, then you can have these smaller teams that are going to do really well with AI. But they got to be on the tools. They got to be out there. They got to be trying. They got to be iterating.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the rise of the generalist, and like, I mean, the implicit bias I'm hearing in myself is wild because the product manager, engineer, generalist is telling you that people should be product manager, engineer, generalist. But sure, I think rise in generalist is like really important. You need to know enough to be dangerous in a lot of different things. And in the right context, AI can fill in the expertise in a lot of settings. And so you need to have enough knowledge to know when something is wrong and you shouldn't, just cut and paste from a marketing, thing that you have to like, but like editorializing is more important now than the creation process because we have creation so readily available. And so you need to know enough in those fields where you're not making major mistakes.
Yeah, no, that's insightful. I saw this, I think it was Scott Galloway had a sort of a webinar or something, and there's a slide that showed 3 different workers. And the first worker was basically what generative AI would replace a 20-something intern level. And that today we're really more like mid-level manager level, maybe they're $200 an hour, but that the worker of the future, the capability of AI is really going to be kind of that consultant level $500 an hour. And what's going to drive that is pattern recognition, repeat experience, business acumen, and wisdom, which is kind of an interesting thought because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, yes, I definitely recognize that interns are going to be challenged to find jobs because folks aren't really hiring as much, and that sucks. And we got to figure out how to like make sure that rung stays a part of our workforce because that's our next generation. But on the flip side, it seems like you have to know what you want and need. You have to have that experience. So wisdom in a very analog historical way is really important, right? Can AI approximate that wisdom? So when I think about the $20,000 PhD ChatGPT operator bot that, I don't know, 2 weeks ago launched, like, what does that really look like? Does it,
Yeah.
would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely am concerned about our juniors in all fields, but especially I think about engineering quite a bit, and so I think about junior engineers, and if we're not hiring those junior engineers, because some of what junior engineers would do is being solved by AI, well, how do we train the next generation to be senior engineers? And that, there's, I was on a panel and I talked about a meme I heard recently, kind of expressing the same thing. And it's a real problem until we get to the level where we don't need the senior level engineers. And that's a little ways away. And so there's something in the gap here where you have to have that human experience of doing the job to get to the next level. And so how do we provide that level of experience in a world where we're not hiring you for the entry level job? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm concerned.
Right. And I think it's the awareness that when we're making decisions as a society about what the contours of our workforce looks like, is to remember that even though you don't have a need for the intern per se, you are training your future workforce. And I even think about like my early days, I was super fortunate to be trained by Michael Robertson, who's mp3.com and Windows OS and a couple exits to Google. Bottom line is I really learned how he thought about business. This is something I didn't learn in school. I had to learn in real time, and I made so many stupid mistakes. And I just think about if you, in absence of having that experience of being Andy's sidekick or, insert entrepreneur here, how do they learn? Because there's this cognitive dissonance, right? Where you can't watch a YouTube video to know how to be a startup, right? And I guess, it kind of comes back to the nonprofit work of Startup San Diego. It's like, got to do this in community. And even if the companies, are going to pull back, especially when these things are getting strange economically, deploy them anyway. And figure out how to train our next workforce. Because it's something that, I don't know, I guess keeps me up at night. If you could sit down with a visionary from history, Leonardo da Vinci, Alan Turing, or anyone and show them iPop, what do you think they'd ask you and how would you answer?
Yeah, I think that, I think both of them would really geek out about just the concept of machines learning in general. And so, both on iPop, that's an AI that learns from visual input. You have the LLMs that learn from different modalities of input. But the concept of training an AI is the thing I probably would most want to talk to them about and showing them, because it is so much like, in some ways, like big conceptual ways, like training a human. Or like when I teach my kids something, it's about showing them examples of what this thing is, and then having them try it out. And when they get it wrong, you give them feedback about what's wrong. That's basically what we're doing in the training process in AI. And I think both of those individuals would think that's absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, Turing is super loaded because he would just be fascinated that something finally passed, like a Turing test, or like that is that close to passing a Turing test. And just, I think that would be a fantastic conversation.
So for the dreamers and builders listening, maybe they're tinkering with their own AI ideas. What's the one mindset shift or principle you'd urge them to adopt to innovate in the same way that you have?
I think that I guess I like to look for practical problems. And so, start small, solve a small problem for somebody. There's a lot of early ideas that I see with folks that they're trying to go too big too quickly. It's like solve something real for somebody first, and then your vision can help you naturally expand out to this sea-changing event. But along the way, you have to help people with something. And so when I help founders, especially new founders, kind of look at what are they doing first? There has to be something that you build first. You're not going to build the big thing first. You got to build some microcosm of what you're trying to solve. It's what's the first thing we could do to make something easier for somebody or to empower them to do something they've never done before.
Yeah, no, that's pretty wise. How about how they should be spending their time in addition to learning tools and advancing the vernacular and understanding of the AI in general? What else would you recommend they do, in community, in the free time?
Yeah, I think at level there, as we've all kind of had to progress from, in that generalist mindset of how do we get to a place where we're a founder and what are our roles as a founder? I think in the modern age, one of your roles as a founder is an evangelist of your company, as an influencer to some degree. Always rep the brand. Start talking about it externally.
Nice job.
But talk to people about what you're doing on some level, and you always find new correlations to even your personal life that you never would have thought about unless you had that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know there's so many people have struggles with launching things that aren't perfect. And it's like, how do you find your people if you don't launch early to help you solve those broken bits of beta, right? And, I forget who says this, but, if you're not embarrassed of your first product, then you're too late.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like people really aren't looking that close, really not looking that closely at you. They've got their own things to worry about. And I just love to see people launch, because if I can see an idea shadow, a contour of an idea, then I'm like, at least they're moving the needle. They're out there, right? And that confidence is enough for me to have confidence in them that they got more up their sleeve. Like, give them a shot, So, very good stuff. All right. So here's our last question. A strange one indeed. If iPop.ai were a machine with a mind of its own, I guess we could argue that it does have a mind of its own. What would it say to the world right now?
I think if it was a reasoning thing, the mission would be instilled in iPop. So I think it's something like, what should we build today? And that's its purpose in life, is to help people build and accomplish their dreams. And so it would ask something like that.
Yes. Oh, awesome. That's a great way to end it, because this is all about accomplishing your dreams, using the tools to do it, not being afraid and stepping out in faith that it's all good. Life is good. Let's start up some business. Let's learn AI. Thank you so much, Andy, for being on the Mind the Machine.
Excellent. Thank you.
I hope you found that show inspiring. I always learn something when I talk to our great guests. And so if you did, please share, because we want to pass these insights along. And bottom line, most important thing that you can do for yourself is to subscribe. You don't want to have to hunt and peck and look for this stuff. Let these insights drop into your queue, so to speak. So hit that subscribe button. And more so, if you want more resources, white papers, presentations, insights, more videos, go to findgood.tech, because we are curating conversation for you so you can stay optimistic and connected in the era of AI that's going to keep you relevant and keep you moving forward. That's Mind the Machine. Thanks for listening.